The following is a conversation with John Perkins, the author behind Confessions of an Economic Hitman. As the former chief economist of the consultancy firm Charles T. Maine, John had an incredible career flying into and then out of a myriad of developing countries, facilitating huge debt trap projects in the likes of Indonesia, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, and more. In this conversation with John, we speak about some of the following: an explanation for what is an economic hitman, John speaking about the CIA Jackals, who today's economic hitman are, some examples of debt trap diplomacy, his role in Saudi Arabia, and then, of course, much more as well. I think this episode of the podcast is best consumed in conjunction with episode 48, author of Blood Bankers Jim Henry, which accounts for literally hundreds of these debt trap projects the likes John played a hand in. In addition to Jim Henry, you can try Nicholas Shaxson, episode 96, which explains the plumbing for the cancerous world of offshore finance, which informs how so much money can slip through the cracks. Or you can try episode 51 with Bradley Hope, who's the co-author of Billion Dollar Whale and one of the journalists who exposed the 1MDB Malaysian sovereign wealth fund scandal, which is an archetypical example of the excesses financial secrecy enables. Or you could try 78 with Oliver Bullough, the Russian oligarch's biggest pain in the ass, author of Moneyland and as well Butler to the World, which pins the United Kingdom at the center of the whole cancerous world of financial secrecy. Or go down under with me and Nathan Lynch, episode 106, on how Australia became the biggest money launderer for Chinese dirty cash, and as well an amazing explanation for the role that property plays in this whole cancerous world of offshore. So in the vein of kleptocracy, capital flight, and corrupt institutions, here is a slice of the worldview of the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, John Perkins. John, what is an economic hitman?
Well, Ryan, I think it's fair to say that we economic hitmen have created what today we can call a death economy, an economic system that's failing us. We can get into that more if you want later. But the way we did this and continue to do it is my job, and my official title, incidentally, was chief economist at a major consulting firm. Economic hitman was kind of, it's like calling a CIA agent a spook. But my job and that of my staff was to identify countries with resources our corporations wanted, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never went to the country. Instead, it went to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects on that country. The country held the debt. They had to pay the interest. They had to take responsibility. They'd never see the money. It went to our corporations, the Halliburtons and the Bechtels and the Stone and Websters and the General Electrics and so forth, to build electrical power systems, industrial parks, highways, ports, infrastructure. And the companies made a lot of money. These were very profitable contracts for them. A few wealthy people in the countries benefited. These were the people whose families owned industry, commerce, the banks. But the majority of the people suffered because money was diverted from healthcare and education and other social services to pay the interest on the debt. I didn't know that at the beginning. I thought we were doing the right thing because the statistics show that when you make these investments and build these infrastructure projects, the economy grows. But the economy, as we measure it, is measured by gross domestic product, GDP. And as it turns out, that really measures how well the rich are doing. It doesn't measure how well the country's actually doing. And again, I can back that up if you want me to later. But so we would build these projects, and in the end, the country couldn't repay its debts. So we'd go back in, and usually under the guise of the International Monetary Fund, and demand that the country allow our corporations to go in and exploit their resources, oil or whatever, with very few environmental or social regulations and at cut rate prices. We would demand that they allow us to build a military base, us being the United States, on their soil, vote with us against Cuba at the United Nations, or some such things. I mean, we made these demands. Basically, it was a form of colonialism. And incidentally, I should say that the alternative for presidents of these countries to accepting these loans, if they refused to accept them, they all knew that behind us stood people we called Jackals, who were CIA assets, and these are people who've overthrown governments or assassinated their leaders. The United States has admitted to this with Allende of Chile and Mossadegh of Iran and Arbenz of Guatemala, Mossadegh of Iran, Lumumba of the Congo, Diem of Vietnam, and on and on. The list goes on. I mean, it's pretty impressive. Basically, I had the opportunity to tell the president of a country, hey, take these loans and you and your family are going to benefit from them a lot. You're going to make a lot of money off this. Your people are going to suffer. But the alternative is we could overthrow you or assassinate you.
How much of a caricature is this understanding of what an economic hitman might be? You fly into country X, Y, or Z, typically a developing nation. You come in with an army of econometric reports and basically environmental reports saying how if you were to construct, X electrical grid here, it would increase the prosperity of people by X%. The only hinge is that it's going to cost you quite a lot of money, but hey, we can also finance you to make this happen, which is going to be good for you politically, and then as well, I guess you can grease the palms of your family and friends if need be. You go ahead, you do that. It turns out that after the construction has come in at 2-3 times the budget, you realize that all of the upside and promise that you were going to deliver is actually kind of on a bed of economic lies. And then the country cannot repay the interest on this loan that you give it. So you come in later and say, all right, well, we'll repay the debt for, say, an ownership of that natural resource that we had built there in the first place.
Yeah, that's very accurate, with one exception, and that is that statistically, usually the country does show that it's better off. So the World Bank can publish all these reports saying that its loans have increased GDP in Ecuador or Sierra Leone or wherever the loans were made, and in fact the GDP has increased, but the majority of the people have suffered. They haven't gained. Here's an example: if you take the United States. 3 individuals here in the United States, 3 individuals have as much wealth as half the population of the United States. If those 3 individuals made 10% on their assets last year, and half the country lost 3%, and the rest of the country just stayed equal, it would look as though the GDP would increase by close to 4%. So it would look as though the country had prospered when in fact only 3 individuals had prospered. Half the country suffered and half the country just stayed the same. 3 individuals made 10%, and it looked as though everybody gained 4%. And if that's true in the United States, where 3 individuals own as much as half the country, what about countries where 1 individual or 3 individuals own 95% or 99%?
Oh my God. Are there examples of that extreme inequality?
Yes, absolutely. We find that in the what we call the lesser income countries. I don't even like the word developed versus undeveloped or developing at this point, because let's face it, the people we refer to as developed countries are not like the United States. We're not developed environmentally speaking, or socially speaking for that matter. We may be developed economically speaking, but I prefer lower income and higher income. A lot of the lower income families, you have a few families who control 90% of the wealth.
For example, where?
Well, you can take Colombia. There's a 5 families. Some people say 15, but it depends on how you measure them and how you call it families that basically control everything there. That may change now that for the first time in modern history they've elected, a person who's very left-leaning. Guatemala. Many places throughout Africa, many of these countries that have these long histories of European colonialism, where that form of colonialism, the Europeans got out of Africa for the most part, but the form of colonialism that was under the Europeans was just transferred to a few very powerful African leaders who've taken advantage of that situation. So we see this sort of thing throughout the world. And yet it is not included in the measurements. This is not talked about in the reports. What the reports show is that gross domestic product has benefited from these loans.
Could you expand off my caricature of what an economic hitman was and explain how you did exactly that. In one of the myriad examples, the book is broken down into different chapters of countries that you were in. My favorite personally is Indonesia and Saudi Arabia, but if you have one that speaks directly to that caricature as a first-hand real-world example.
Well, Indonesia is a great example where we were struggling. The balance of power had shifted. You know, there'd been a President Sukarno and President Suharto, and we were, at the time that I went in, which was in the early 70s, when I first went into Indonesia. Indonesia had potential of a lot of oil, which we wanted. And it also was the largest country in the world with a Muslim. It has the largest Muslim population of any country in the world. And the government of Indonesia was flirting very, very much with both the Soviets and Maoist China at the time. And even though they ostensibly were allies of ours, there was this incredible flirtation going on. They were using this as leverage. And so my job was to go in and convince the government to accept these huge loans to hire American companies to build, in this particular case, a highly integrated electrical system between West Java, Central Java, and East Java, and a number of other big projects. And basically, you know, here's the caricature. And this is a caricature. It's not. I'm simplifying this, but basically, what I would do is go in and talk to somebody. It might be the president, or it might be the minister of finance, or minister of planning, and I'd basically say, hey, you know, in this hand, I've got, in today's terms, it would be billions of dollars for you and your family and all your friends. If you accept these loans, you're all going to do really well. And we had ways of legally, the United States standards, bribing people. I can go into that if you want more. But also, the economy is going to grow. The electricity is going to really help the industries that you own, where you're currently having to self-generate. You have your own generating plants in your big industries, and it's very expensive for you. So in this hand, I have these billions of dollars, if you sign off on this loan, that are going to benefit you and your friends and families very, very much. And in this hand, I've got a gun pointed right at you. And I didn't actually have a gun. I never carried a gun, but I knew that the Jackals were right behind me, and they knew it too. And so, you know, these presidents or ministers of finance or whoever you're dealing with are in a very difficult situation. Oh, and incidentally, I can give you lots of reports that you can hand out to your people, press, that'll show that these loans are going to create a growth in GDP. And everybody believes GDP means everybody prospers. And even for most of the time I was in that job, I believed that was prosperous too. I didn't understand the nuances of GDP, because in business school and through reports of the World Bank and so on, we're taught that GDP means growth. It means prosperity for everyone. No, it's a growing pie it's a growing piece of the pie for the very wealthy. I mean, they're just taking more and more and more of the pie, and yet we don't know that. And there's a hell of a lot of people right now working in the same business that have no idea that that's the case. They still see GDP as the standard measurement.
John, I've never really fully understood the necessity of the threat of jackals, the threat of assassination, and the threat of violence. Why isn't just you, as a person representing Charles T. Maine as the chief economist, coming in and promising all of this political upside, all of this economic upside? Why isn't that significant enough of an argument with all the countries you could be offering it to as well? Why was the threat of jackals necessary? Because that just generates all the conspiracy.
Well, because we're asking these people ultimately to sell their country's resources at very cheap prices. We're asking them, and they can figure this out, we're asking them to be part of an American empire. We're asking them to be colonized once again. And here, so two of my clients didn't accept the loans. Jaime Roldos, president of Ecuador, and Omar Torrijos, head of state of Panama. And they stood up to the system. They said no. They had tremendous integrity. They said, we're not going to buy into this. And they knew very well about the Jackals. They were very aware of what happened in neighboring Guatemala with Arbenz, and in Chile with Allende, two presidents that have been taken out by Jackals. But they still had tremendous integrity. and they both died in very suspicious airplane crashes. I have no doubt, and most of people who've looked into this have no doubt that those were CIA orchestrated. There's never been a smoking gun. There's no proof, but airplane crashes are the best way to assassinate someone because all the evidence gets blown up with the plane. But once that happened to these two, and it happened in 1981, it was 3 months apart that this happened, that sent an incredibly strong message throughout the world, especially Latin America, but throughout the world. They knew what had happened, and any president or who was on the border between working with us or turning against us and turning toward the Soviets or the Chinese saw this and said, "Geez, I don't want to take any risks with the Americans. They're dangerous." So they're very effective.
I get the sense that the sort of criticism and skepticism for the Confessions of an Economic Hitman argument is that the threat of a prime minister and presidential assassination is just so much more unthinkable for us now. Is that an explanation for why it feels like the threat of violence and the threat of Jackals might not necessarily map onto the way current economic hitmen and debt trap diplomatists might be operating?
Not at all. President Zelaya of Honduras was taken out in 2009. There was a coup against President Correa of Ecuador. We went into Afghanistan. We went into Iraq. We've taken out governments in Egypt, and it continues in a very, very big way. I think people, if anything, understand this better. And those criticisms that originally came out when the first book came out in 2005, the book came out in 2004, but I don't hear them anymore. We've since then had all the WikiLeaks leaks, and we've had the CIA exposed by Edward Snowden, and there've been a lot of other books and a lot of other evidence that indicates this, and a lot of people have come forward. Henry Kissinger himself has admitted to deep involvement with the CIA in several of these countries. So I think that if anything, leaders are perhaps more aware of this now than ever, although increasingly they're looking to China as an alternative because China does not have the reputation of taking out leaders or in any way interfering with governments. In fact, they make a very big point out of, we're not going to interfere with their governments. Very different from neoliberal economics, which is what the World Bank uses, that outright says, we want to have control over your government and its economic policies. The Chinese say, no, we're not interested in doing that. So as a result, the world is in the process of transferring these debts to China, and I'm not trying to defend China. China is ultimately trying to do the same thing. It's trying to take resources and build up its own economy back home, but it does present a different perception to the world, which to some degree is backed up by its history of not being involved in assassinations or coups. And again, I want to say, so, everybody knows that the United States has been deeply involved with trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela and Nicaragua. And, whether or not you believe in these governments, and I'm not defending those governments at all, the fact of the matter is countries often resent the fact that the United States attempts to meddle in their politics.
There's a fantastic book called The Second Continent by Howard French. I'm sure maybe you consulted for the book on China that you have coming up, but he just tells the story of how a couple of different Chinese interests are sort of wiggling their way into the halls of power, and as well, not necessarily the halls of power, the heights of industries in various countries throughout Africa. And the overwhelming message that he makes is just that they're only there for economic interest. They give zero, there is no consideration of how moral a government might be, or what a cultural expectation might be, or what the religion of the local place is. It's just what is the economic interest. And maybe that is a separate, way of going about things from the neoliberal, more American style that you experienced during the time you were in EHM.
Yeah, Ryan. I think that the Chinese say this as a selling point. So, if you really want to simplify things, the message that American economic hitmen and European gave was, if you want your country to prosper, take out a big loan from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations, what's called the Washington Consensus, and hire our companies to build big infrastructure projects in your country and subscribe to neoliberalism. That means do the policies that we recommend, which basically neoliberalism is lowering taxes on the rich and lowering wages and social services on everybody else, and privatizing things. So it's very much oriented toward private corporatization, and it's trickle down economics that says, if you make the rich richer, then everybody's going to benefit, which just has proven not to be the case. The Chinese say something very similar in terms of, they say, if you want your country to prosper, take these big loans from China's banks and hire our companies, Chinese companies, to build big infrastructure projects in your country, and become part of the new Silk Road, an international trading network where you can trade with the whole world, and we will not interfere with your government in any way. We do not believe in neoliberal economics. That's not what helped us pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. And so we're not going to interfere with you in any way whatsoever. And, the United States will respond by saying, well, that means that you're supporting dictators and bad governments and so on and so forth. And the Chinese would then say, well, don't you think some of the countries you've supported are dictatorships? And certainly they are, Egypt being one of them. Look at Saudi Arabia, look at so many. So there's this perceptional warfare that's going on. But for many countries that have experienced years, decades, maybe even centuries of colonialism in Africa and Latin America under the European powers, they're tired of this. They're tired of countries meddling in their government systems and in their morality and in their ethics and and the United States does that, and Europe has done that. China makes a point of not doing that. I'm not sure that China is sincere in all of that. I'm not sure that they actually will keep those promises, but it's a very attractive proposition to leaders in countries that are used to being exploited through colonialism.
So I just want to, I'm noticing the time constraints, but I'd love to ask you about Saudi Arabia, the debt traps, and then China and Belt and Road. So first of all, just because it was my favorite sort of experience from the book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, could you talk about your experiences in Saudi Arabia?
Well, Saudi Arabia is an exception to what I've been describing, in that Saudi Arabia didn't need to take out loans. Saudi Arabia had the resources through oil. But what we needed to do was convince Saudi Arabia that it needed to modernize, and Saudis were very aware of this. When I went into Saudi Arabia in the early 70s, one of the first things that I experienced was this huge herd of goats that wandered around this capital city of Riyadh. And I asked someone, what are those goats doing? And the answer was, they're collecting garbage, or they were eating garbage. That was the garbage system. And here was one of the wealthiest countries per capita in the world at the time, and yet it didn't have a garbage collection system that worked other than goats. And the Saudis were very embarrassed by this, and they wanted to modernize. So they were hiring my company. We were the first to go in and look at, particularly at electrifying the system, building a bigger electrical system.
Wasn't that just so thrilling to have been involved in that?
It was interesting. It was fascinating, and I had three guys who had to spend many months there traveling to every population center in the country to see how they were producing energy. Were they just burning camel dung, to heat up to cook their food, or did they have a guy on a bicycle, stationary bicycle, generating electricity? And there were some of those. But we had to record all of that and then figure out how to design an integrated electrical system that would serve the whole country, because that's what the Saudis wanted. And they had the money to pay for it. But, we convinced the Saudis, so part of the deal was that we convinced the Saudis that all the petrodollars, and remember, part of this has come because Saudi Arabia led OPEC in a boycott, wouldn't sell oil to the world, and it caused a huge recession in the United States and Europe in the early 70s. So the Treasury Department came to me and said, and it came to other consultants too, but particularly my company was the first to get the big contract with the Treasury Department. They said, this can't happen anymore. We've got to convince Saudi Arabia that they can no longer hold us hostage for oil. So we struck this deal that I write about in the book as the Saudi Arabia money laundering affair, SAMI, Saudi Arabia money laundering affair. And, the deal was that the Saudis would reinvest their petrodollars in U.S. government securities, most of their petrodollars. And the U.S. government would use the interest from that, or a large share of the interest from that, to hire American companies to westernize Saudi Arabia, to build power plants and to build cities, to build desalination plants and to build petrochemical plants. And it was also agreed that Saudi Arabia would, and OPEC would not sell oil for anything other than the dollar. We'd gone off the gold standard in '71 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. And now the dollar was floating freely, and it was scary for the Treasury Department. So they wanted Saudi Arabia, and so the oil became the new standard. We went off the gold standard.
What an unbelievably influential economic decision.
Well, yes, and at the same time, we agreed to defend the royal family of Saudi Arabia, to stand by them, keep them in power, and we've done that. I mean, look at the thing with Khashoggi. Recently, we have not confronted them, and President Biden just went there and.
Or the fact that many of the 9/11 hijackers were Saudi nationals, yet you invade Pakistan and Afghanistan. Well, not Pakistan. Sorry, Afghanistan.
Iraq,
Yeah.
Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah, of course. And when the planes were not allowed to fly anywhere in the United States, there were a few planes taking members of the royal family, the House of Saud, out of the United States back to Saudi Arabia. Yes, we stood by that and we protected them. And when Iraq invaded Kuwait and threatened to invade Saudi, we went to war with Iraq.
How does it make you now? How does it make you feel now to look at Saudi Arabia as potentially one of the most technologically developed places in the world?
Yeah, well, it's, I don't know. How do I feel about it? I think that it's tragic that a country with so much wealth, and this includes neighboring countries, is so anti-women, is so medieval in many regards, and treats a lot of its workers terribly. It's just, I think that's tragic, but I don't know that the United States or anybody else should be interfering with that. I think it's up to the people to do something. And these are very, very difficult arguments to make. You're
hitting at ancient traditions and religions.
Yeah. Well, I've got a book coming out in early 2003 that deals with the economic hitmen of China, and I think what we really need to do is focus our attention on climate change. We need to focus our attention on this death economy that we've created that's destroying life as we know it on this planet, and transform that into a life economy. Did I mix my words there?
No,
the death economy destroying the planet. Yeah, we need to transform into a life economy that will pay people to clean up pollution, to regenerate destroyed environments, to recycle, to develop technologies that don't ravage the planet. And we need to understand that if you look at GDP, almost half of the world's GDP is provided by the two countries of China and the United States, something like 47%, and an equal amount of the pollution. So these two huge nations are the big economic driving forces of the world, and also the biggest polluters in the world, both of us. And to me, the real challenge here, what we really need to focus on, is how can we bring these two countries together to recognize that nobody thrives on a dead planet, and that we've got to change our economic policy. China and the United States can disagree about Taiwan and Afghanistan and the Uyghurs and the indigenous people of the United States. I mean, they say what we talk about the Uyghurs, they say similar things about our indigenous people and other minorities. So we can disagree on everything, but let's agree that we've got to move out of an economic system that is destroying life as we know it on this planet.
Something that we've kind of been speaking around, but like is explicitly the work of the economic hitman, as you write about it in the book, is this notion of sort of debt trap diplomacy. And I'm sure this is something that is central to your upcoming China book.
Yeah.
Can you describe what is debt trap diplomacy?
Well, it is this. It's it's central to all of it. Yeah, it's what economic hitmen do. So you load these countries with huge amounts of debt that they use to pay your companies to do something for them, and your companies get rich, and then they're caught in the trap of having all this debt, which means they owe you. It's the old mafia thing, Ryan. Hey, Ryan. Oh, your daughter's getting married, and you need $100,000 for your daughter's wedding, or you need $10,000. Well, here it is. No strings attached, Ryan. This is it. I like you. You're a good guy. I like your daughter. Here's your money. And then a year later, hey, Ryan, Jack over here, he's pissing me off. He's infringing upon my territory. He's trying to move drugs faster than I move drugs. Take him out. And you're like, well, I can't. Ryan, you owe me. You owe me. Remember that? You remember that? You owe me. You owe me big time. If you don't take him out, well, what's your life worth? So, it's that same debt trap economics is the same thing done on a national basis. And it's gone on throughout history. You can go way back to the Persian Empire, the early Chinese empires, or the Roman or Greek empires, and you had that kind of same sort of thing, where sometimes the debt wasn't money, it was favors owed. Exactly what I said, I'm the king, I just took over your territories, but hey, Ryan, now that I've taken over your territory, I'm going to offer you my daughter in marriage, but you got to help me defeat the neighbors on the other side of you. You got to join forces with me. You got to do what I want you to do. It's a very old system of type of enslavement.
I like that quote you use quite a lot throughout the book, and you just sort of referenced it there, not explicitly, but you mentioned it always as being a game as old as empire. This idea of
Yes.
But can we bring it maybe to a real world example, debt trap?
Well, we like to talk about Sri Lanka as being due to the Chinese debt, and there's certainly a lot of truth to that. But we've been putting Sri Lanka in debt for a long time before that too. The World Bank. I mean, there's been a lot of that going on. Yeah, Sri Lanka and its family that runs the country have continually taken on big amounts of debt, and presumably there's a lot of that that's gone into corruption for them and their family, that they've skimmed a lot off the top. But the country is in deep debt now. And yes, the one that the Western press likes to ballyhoo is this port that that was built with Chinese debt. But again, it wasn't. So the Chinese, unlike the Chinese didn't really go in and say, hey, you build this port. They let Sri Lanka say, we want a new port. And maybe some of the Chinese advisors also indicated that a port would be a good thing. But basically, China took advantage of the family that rules China, of wanting to have this port and wanting to have a lot of other things. So yeah, right now Sri Lanka owes a lot of money to China, but the whole debt trap scenario has been going on for some time there. What's your other example?
There was a hydro dam in Brazil called the Balbina Dam, and this is taken from Jim Henry's Blood Bankers, which I spoke to about off air and the audience knows about, but it's just this unbelievable document that highlights hundreds of cases of not explicitly debt trap, but mostly sort of corrupt offshore financing deals, for fake infrastructure and projects and
Yeah.
so forth. But this Balbina Dam basically came in at, I'll just give the scorecard quickly. It came in at 3 times the price, late, half of its operational potential. It cost 2,000 square miles of desolation of Amazon rainforest, the eradication of dozens of indigenous wildlife, the displacement of tribes. It caused 28 times the methane gas of an equivalent coal-fired plant. And then 20 years later, had zero use. So just an unbelievably costly
And whose debt was that? Who provided the loans? And who built the project?
I'm pretty sure. No, I'm just going
Well,
because I do have it,
let,
but I'm off memory. I'm pretty sure it was an Italian construction company done with Italian banks.
yeah. Yeah, let me give you another example. And that is, so Rafael Correa, president of Ecuador for about 10 years, has a PhD in economics from, he really has an MBA from Belgium and a PhD in economics from the United States. I know Rafael quite well, and he's now living in Belgium. We've talked on Zoom recently. Um, he understands the system. And when he first became president of Ecuador, he appointed a commission to look into whether the Ecuadorians really owed all the debt that the World Bank claimed they owed. And the commission came to the conclusion that they didn't. About $35 billion worth of that debt, I think I got that number right, a large amount of that debt was not owed by the people of Ecuador because it had been accepted by military dictators in Ecuador who were put into power essentially by the United States and were very corrupt. And they took on this debt without checking with the people. There was no democracy involved. And so the commission said, no, the dictators owe the debt. And the World Bank should not have not given this debt because it was used for lousy projects. And there was a lot of corruption. But the people of Ecuador don't owe the money. That's for sure. Maybe John Perkins owes the money. He was an economic hitman. That's what Correa says that, with tongue in cheek. But there's a certain truth to it. But the people of Ecuador don't owe it. And so Correa defaulted on the loan. And immediately all the Western rating agencies, Fitch's and all the other ones, downgraded Ecuador to trash. Ecuador had no financial standing in the Western world. China stepped in and offered Ecuador a big loan at low interest that Ecuador could pay off. And pretty soon their ratings went back up. And then China gave them another loan. And Correa, who'd been trained in the United States, had a PhD, he turns against the United States and he turns to China. And as a consequence, China built a huge hydroelectric dam and power plant in the jungle, in the very fragile rainforest. This dam was supposed to provide power for roughly between a third and a half of the whole country of Ecuador. But they built it on a fault line next to an active volcano, Reventador, in the middle of a fragile rainforest. And when they turned on they had 8 generating units. When they turned them on, the whole electrical system of Ecuador shorted out. And there's cracks now in the generating house, and it's never operated at capacity, or anything close to capacity. But Ecuador now owes all this money to China. So China now is going in with its mining companies and mining gold and copper and other minerals deep in the Amazon rainforest and building projects which are very poorly engineered, according to the engineers that have looked at them. Retaining dams that are holding cyanide and mercury that are likely to fail, especially if there's a bad earthquake, and dump incredible amounts of toxic chemicals into the rivers that flow into the Amazon and then out into the Atlantic Ocean. There's your typical story of how this whole thing mushrooms. And, you had a president come in that really wanted to do the right thing. You want to say, my people don't owe this debt. But we slam dunked him as a result. Said, yeah, you do owe the debt and you're not paying it, so you're going to be rated poorly. And China sees this as an opportunity, steps in, and then imposes the debt trap. So to me, that's a classic example, and it's one that's done by a president who I think was totally sincere in trying to do the best thing for his country, understood global economics. And I wrote in the New Confessions of an Economic Hitman about how I thought Correa did this because he was scared by the attempted coup against him, and the coup that succeeded was Zelaya in Honduras. And then he turned around and made changes. Well, he's debated me on this, and he has his own television program which reaches a lot of Latin America, and I've been on it with him. And he'll say, John, that's not the case. He said, and this is interesting, Ryan. He says, the fact of the matter is, the area that we're talking about, where all these minerals and oil exist in the Amazon, and roughly almost half the country of Ecuador, is extremely unpopulated. It's very, very few people living there. All these, these indigenous people who are living in this fragile rainforest. But from a population standpoint, it's not very much populated. So, on the other hand, in the Andes Mountains and along the coast, that's one of the most densely populated places in the Americas. And the people in these densely populated areas, they want better education. They want better health care. They want better hospitals. They want social services. And they put tremendous pressure on a president or the government of Ecuador to go out and exploit these resources, which is the only way that we can have enough money to provide better social services. That's the dilemma. And then the United States or China comes along and takes advantage of this vulnerability. Yes, of a tremendous vulnerability.
That real world example you just gave from the mouth of Correa is so fascinating.
Where are you, Ryan? Where are you located?
Sweden.
You're not that far from Belgium.
No.
You're a lot closer to Belgium than I am. I would strongly recommend that you try to get in touch with Correa. He has his own podcast, television show, and I think he'd be happy to talk with you, and I think it'd be a really great conversation.
If you'd put me in touch with him, I would be beyond thrilled to do that, John.
All right. Well, when we go off the air, I'll give you the information.
We haven't spoken, at all off air, but one of the big projects that I'm working on is with Jim Henry, this author of Blood Bankers, and we're trying to do an updated version. And, that Balbina example is pulled straight from there. This example you just gave would be something straight from there. For me, it's the most sort of tangible way to understand how pervasive something might be by giving these real world examples and just bringing it home by pointing out this. So that would be amazing.
And incidentally, that example is in my new book in more detail and the actual numbers, which I don't remember.
We'll bring them to the next one, promoting the China book, because I'm thinking about as well the amount of examples along the Chinese Belt and Road, and then as well sort of the motivation for why they would want this independent trade route in the first place, and then what that says about globalization, international trade. Obviously that's why it's such a fascinating topic that you decided to discuss. But I want to bring up something with you, and it's about the global offshore haven, phenomenon, industry, financial secrecy. This is, at least from my, shallow understanding, probably the most important variable to all of this functioning and working. Yet there isn't much emphasis on it in Confessions of an Economic Hitman. But in books that would be classified in the same genre as you, say Treasure Islands, Nick Shaxson, Blood Bankers, Jim Henry, Billion Dollar Whale, Kleptocracy, Moneyland, Oliver Bullough, all these great books speaking about the offshore financial industry, they would be in the same genre as yours, but in your specific book, there isn't much mention of it. So I just really want to hear why that is, but also, what you make of it.
Well, it's not there because I'm a macroeconomist, and my idea was convincing countries to take these huge loans and do development economics. I wasn't involved, and certainly not any kind of an expert on the financial side of these things. So that was something that I was never involved in, and my books are confessions. I write about personal things that I can have actually experienced rather than speculate on a lot of other issues. But that's a big part of it. But it's not just offshore. We found as through the Panama Papers and some of the other exposés that there's the states in the United States where the banking laws are or even cities where the banking laws are extremely loose and allow for these sorts of things to go on also.
Mm. But in your dealings, you're facilitating financing, right? Like, you might not necessarily be the financier or the macroeconomist presenting the great pitch of the value for this localized people over here. But presumably there is still some mediating factor that you have to maybe know where the money's coming from, or then once you give it to them, how they're going to distribute it. how people are paying taxes and all of this, where the offshore haven might be located. Just, any of that in your own experience.
Yeah, no, I paid no attention to that. My job was to get the president of a country to accept this huge loan from the World Bank. The money went directly from the World Bank in Washington to Bechtel's Bank in San Francisco, or Stone and Webster's Bank in Boston, or Halliburton's Bank in Texas. And and in the process, then part of the deal was, Mr. President, if you take on this loan, not only are you going to benefit through the use of electricity, but also we're gonna your brother-in-law has a contracting company that builds that digs ditches and lays pipe. We'll see to it that your brother-in-law's company is hired, and we're happy to pay premium prices for his work. We're not going to ask for a discount. In other words, he can bill us $2 million for something that would normally bill $1 million. And if he wants to give that $1 million windfall, half of it to you or all of it to you and he can figure that out. We don't want anything to do with that. We're not bribing anybody. We're totally legal, but we're happy to pay more than we should because that's not illegal. And your sister has the John Deere franchise, and we're going to rent John Deere equipment, and again we'll pay double. So these sorts of things go on, and when the president or his brother or his sister or whoever gets the money, I don't know what they do with it. Whether they put it in the bank in the Turks and Caicos or what they do with the money. They put what they do with it. I don't want to know.
But when you were, say, traveling the world, making these deals, did you have with you in your team financiers and bankers who did explicitly understand this world? Because I'm trying to marry all of these different books in this genre that I love so much together and understand the whole worldview. Where does Blood Bankers complement the economic hitman, complement, say, the offshore accountant in the Caymans?
Yeah, well, to me, it's two separate worlds. And my world was to convince these governments to take on these huge loans to hire our companies. And then the money, when I did it, almost all the money came from what we call the Washington Consensus, the U.S. Treasury Department, the IMF, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank. It came through those organizations. And, Wall Street, private banks typically weren't involved in what we were doing. So it was a pretty straightforward thing. All I had to do was to convince these countries to take these loans and to commit to never seeing the money, to sign off on the debt, but then hiring our companies to use that money to build infrastructure projects. So there's undoubtedly a relationship there, but it's almost like two separate worlds.
In the book, you have these various sort of moments of crisis, self-doubt. What is the ethics, the morale of what I'm doing? And, you've since sort of committed the career to making penance for the immorality of the job that you were doing. But I just can't help but project a romanticization onto this lifestyle that you're leading and this sort of interesting work of going to different countries, meeting with the important people, securing deals that theoretically were going to influence the lives of millions of different people. How much do you look back on the days with sort of a romantic view versus is it all sort of shame and disgust?
It's not all shame and disgust because for the first, I was only in the business for 10 years. And for the first 6 or 7 years, and I believed in what I was doing because that's what I'd been taught in business school. That's why the World Bank had all these reports to convince you that, take out these loans, build companies, GDP grows. It does. I could see that. I could look at all the statistics from 25 years earlier, and we could project them into the future using at the time, very sophisticated econometric models and see that the country was going to benefit. But it was, I speak Spanish and fluently, and I could talk with the people. And Omar Torrijos of Panama, the one that was ultimately died in a plane crash, he explained all this to me. He said, "John, can't you see the shadow side of this? Can't you see the story behind the story? That only the rich people in these countries really benefit from this, and for the most part, everybody else suffers." And so then I began to look at it, and once I understood the truth behind the statistical lies that we were presenting, and they're not necessarily lies; they're just formulated on a basis that strongly favors big corporations, no question about it. And he said, but once I saw that, Ryan, I didn't want to believe it. And I think this is an important story because I think there's a lot of people who, I was making a really good salary. And I grew up a pretty poor son of teachers in New Hampshire, rural New Hampshire. I'd never gone anywhere until I went to Boston to college. And that's the next state. That's the next state to borders New Hampshire. And suddenly I'm traveling the world. I'm flying first class. I'm staying in the best hotels and eating in the finest restaurants and wining and dining with presidents and celebrity, beautiful women. And it's like, I don't want to believe. I want to believe the lie, but as time went on, my conscience over the next 3 or 4 years, my conscience continually I began to see more and more and more. And then I had one moment of deep enlightenment when I knew I had to quit and did.
And even now, sort of having so many years removed between you operating as an EHM and sitting here now, there's still parts of it that you really romanticize.
Well, there were parts of it that were very romantic. There were women who were very romantic. I visited places in, Indonesia and Egypt and Iran. I loved Iran. There were parts of the lifestyle that were very romantic. Yeah, I worked for the Shah basically, yeah, I spent a lot of time in Iran all during the 70s. And throughout Latin America, and I still go to Latin America. I'm on my way there in 2 weeks. I'm going into the Amazon rainforest. I take groups of people. If anybody wants to join me, just look at johnperkins.org.
I'm going to ask you about that off air, actually. I'd love to join you to Guatemala, that trip you're doing.
Well, Guatemala's in January, and I go to Ecuador again in December. These are marvelous trips where we hang out with all the indigenous shamans and teachers, and it's phenomenal. So, the fact is, I did that for 10 years. I ended in 81, and I devoted the rest of my life to trying to turn things around. Do I feel bad about the things I did? Yes, I do. But I also understand that I was naive. I was being conned myself, and I got out. And I feel good about the fact that I have a lot of credibility because I went through that experience. And I'm invited to speak at huge international economic forums and at corporations, which has always surprised me that some of these people... I gave a major speech at the World Bank a number of years ago. My books are very popular. At the World Bank bookstore, they were on a shelf of the 10 most popular books that the World Bank had sold for several years, and it was number 4. That really struck me as odd. And I asked to talk to the manager. I said, I'm surprised.
Considering your direct criticism of them as well.
Yeah, I said, I'm surprised you even sell this book here. And he says, well, we sell whatever our clients want. The people at the World Bank, they want this book. And I hear from so many people about how the book has enlightened them and changed their lives, which helps to counterbalance the guilt I may feel for the things that I did do that were wrong during those 10 years.
John, there's absolutely no doubt that it really challenges and, to a degree, changes one's sort of worldview when they ever think of economic development, whoever would think of economic development in a shallow or a deep fashion. And I wanted to ask you what you made of the commercial success of EHM, because, as it says on your website, almost 2 million copies sold. That puts you at the tail end of the tail end of the tail end of book sale distribution. And if you think of all these equivalents that I've also already mentioned in the same genre throughout this conversation, they probably a little bit above average of book distribution sales, but it's in a completely different ball game to how EHM did. How do you account for the commercial success particularly, and the fact that it's touched so many different people?
I don't know. And it's way more than two. Does it say my website says almost 4 million?
It says 1.7.
Really? We could. Oh, it's way over 2 million.
Wow,
now.
really? Are you prepared to say how many?
Yeah. I don't know. I the last I knew it was like 2.2 million or something like that. But
that puts you at the sure. Top 0.0001% of books of all time sales.
Yeah, in 38 languages, and it's 37 languages, and 73, the opposite, weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, I think. I don't know. It caught on very, very quickly. I was on. First, let me say that the manuscript was rejected by 39 publishers.
Wow, for real?
I got 39 rejection slips. I tell you, if there's any budding authors or anybody out there that's struggling with rejection, just keep trying. And what you got to tell yourself is, don't take it personally. It's not personal. That editor rejected me. But I had to create the story for myself. I got a rejection slip from Penguin. I'd have to say, well, that editor, she had a fight with her husband at breakfast and just threw everything into the rejection file because she was pissed off. Or this editor, well, he had flu when he came into the office, and he just, and just keep going. And then the 40th took it, and almost immediately after it was published, it went to the New York Times bestseller list. And I was on one show, sometime within the first couple of weeks after it was out, Amy Goodman, Democracy Now!, and in the morning, and for 10 minutes, I was on her show. And that afternoon, the book went to the top 10 in Amazon, and then it went to the New York Times, and it just kept going.
Yeah, it's almost like a stroke of serendipitous fortune that you sort of get on the hamster wheel, the domino.
And I think, I had another book, The Secret History of the American Empire, that was on the New York Times bestseller list very briefly. But it just, wasn't as fun. I think Confessions is a fun read.
It's an entertaining read, 100%. Yeah.
Yes, people keep telling me it's a page turner. I picked it up and I read the whole thing in 24 hours. And the next one, which was Secret History of the American Empire, published by Penguin, they gave me a really good contract. Now I didn't have to go out trying to sell a book. They were coming to me, and it just wasn't as much fun to read. It had some really good information in it, but it's not as much fun to read. So I think the combined aspects of the facts that were presented, or the information that was presented, and the story behind them that, like you said, reads like almost like a spy novel, and it's all totally true. But it's as a writer, you want to make the exciting parts ring. I don't mention all the incredible number of hours I spent writing reports. I don't devote 100 pages to all the reports. That would be very boring. And so, I do emphasize the things that I think will make it a page turner, and I think that seems to have worked. But again, all the things that are in there as page turners were also in there because I thought they would help present the points that I wanted to make.
Is it a hard exit for you in a minute or two?
I just got a text that I did a little exchange that I can delay another 15 minutes.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. In that case, I just love to hear briefly, if possible, maybe it can wait till the next one where we talk about China, but the modern equivalent of, say, Charles T. Maine, of the economic hitman, are they still, tightly buttoned chief economists of consultancy firms, or is it a whole different breed of people in different areas entirely?
Yeah. So the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which was published 12 years after the original in 2016, I talk about this new breed. So we've still got the people that did what I did, which was kind of generic. We just wanted to bring resources and riches and profits into American corporations. And really, I didn't care whether Bechtel or Halliburton got the construction job as long as my company got some of the the consulting work. As long as we got a pretty good share of the consulting, that's all we were interested in. I didn't care as long as some American company got it. And that still goes on. But in addition, now every major international company has economic hitmen. Whether it's Walmart or Amazon or Google or you name it, any international company has its economic hitmen that are just pushing for that company. So a classic case is Amazon in the United States had sent their economic hitmen to pit various cities against each other. For Amazon said we're gonna build a new facility. Who's going to get it? And New York ultimately got it. And because they offered all these tax breaks and so on and so forth, and then the people of New York said, no, we don't want it. And so it was transferred to, I think, Atlanta. But whenever a company's going to build a new big plant, an industry, that's just one of many examples, or open a huge new marketing effort, they'll go to Sri Lanka. They'll go to Indonesia and the Philippines, and the economic hitmen go in and they say, hey, we're going to employ a lot of your people, but you're going to give us a really good deal. Tax breaks, no environmental laws, and so on and so forth. And many of these new economic hitmen, these are people who were senators in the U.S. government, in the U.S. Senate, or representatives in the U.S. Congress who didn't get reelected or decided they didn't want to keep running, and so they go in as lobbyists or consultants, advisors. They don't call themselves economic hitmen, but their job is to promote that company and to do everything they can to get the lowest tax rates, the least regulations environmentally and socially, and on and on and on. So it's gotten much bigger. It's become a bigger business, the economic hitman business. But they don't call themselves economic hitmen, but they are.
Yeah. I mean, implied in the word hitman is that it's always malicious. I wanted to ask you if there was any chance that within the economic hitman worldview, there is genuine upside to be had in certain circumstances, and perhaps it's a survivorship bias of the bad examples that rise to the top, that's what you refer to. But if you give the example of, say, Amazon going to Atlanta because they got a bunch of tax breaks, I mean, I could easily sit on the other side of that argument and say that's a net benefit to Atlanta. So is it necessarily that they're always malicious?
I think they're always driven by a goal of maximizing short-term profits. And I think ultimately that's malicious for all of us. That's the death economy. The death economy is about maximizing short-term profit, something that Milton Friedman, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1976, promoted very strongly, and it's a terrible goal, maximizing short-term profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. So I think all of these things we're talking about are promoted by that. Whatever economic hitmen do in this westernized version of capitalism is malicious in that it's creating a world that's destroying itself, basically. It's creating a human philosophy that's destroying the world. That's probably a better way to put it. The world as we know it. So while it may not seem malicious on a short-term basis for the people of Atlanta, ultimately it is creating havoc because something's giving, something that company is getting benefits it shouldn't be getting. It's using huge amounts of public funds, fire department, police department, transportation systems, the airport, and so on, and yet it's being told it doesn't have to pay taxes to cover those things.
Yeah, it consumes a ridiculous amount of public utility. It's free riding, given the economic talk.
Exactly.
John, we've coming towards the end of the time, so I want to ask you one more. But before I ask it, I just want to say this so I get a chance before the time runs out. But many years ago, I think in 2014, I first read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and I barely read any books at all. In my life, had probably a handful of books that I would read. and I loved it, and I just thought it was fascinating, and it really changed my worldview quite a lot. But then, I did nothing with that for many years, and then started this podcast in 2020 and became really, really, really interested mostly in financial secrecy and how that is really a cancer upon the world. And that introduced me to so many other authors, including Jim Henry, who that serendipitous interaction has really also been a huge influence on my life, because now we're working together and going towards certain ways. And it all sort of started with the gem of the economic hitman, the entertainment of it, the fascination of it. So I just want to say, it's a very influential book to me, and I like it a lot. And I think I can make the argument for why it was such a good commercial success versus these other ones. I think you humbly say you don't know, but at the end of the day, it's because it's a bloody good story that's really well told. And so, cheers, John. I was quite nervous before we did this podcast, and we've gone through 5% of the questions that I wanted to ask. So hopefully there's another chance in the future to do more. But nonetheless, I just want to say all that and then leave you with this final question. Can you describe a moment in your life that, looking back on it, you can't believe you were there? You can't believe you were a part of it.
Well, certainly, the Saudi Arabia money laundering affair was a big one, and I often look back at that and say, how did we sell our souls at that point? I mean, the United States really, really cut a devil's deal, and in a certain way, that Saudi Arabia cut a devil's deal too. And I look back on that and say, how did I ever get involved in that? And in the book, I talk about how I actually had to pimp for one of the Saudi princes who got to vote on this deal. The whole Saudi family had to basically agree on the deal, and one who lived in Boston required that he basically required that I set him up with a beautiful blonde woman, and it couldn't be a prostitute; it had to be someone with sophistication. And I ended up doing that and having to cover it out of my expense account. Wow. It was just crazy. That's in the book. Crazy stuff. A moment that was particularly important to me was Omar Torrijos invited me out one time on a yacht. He didn't own yachts or anything, but he had friends that did. And we go out on this yacht, and we're out there we're surrounded by lovely ladies in small bikinis, and we're drinking, margaritas or something. And Omar says to me, he says, "John, don't you realize what you're doing? Don't you realize that all the lies that you're selling? When you try to get me and my country to accept these huge loans, you're trying to get us to become slaves to you. And we're already slaves to some degree. The Panama is the United States, but you're trying to dig us in deeper. Don't you realize that?" And he went on and explained to me. He was one of the first to really explain to me. And then he said to me, "Why don't you come and work for me?" He said, "You'd have a really good life." And he points around his yacht. And he says, "You wouldn't make nearly as much money as you're making now, but you'd really enjoy yourself, and you'd feel good about what you're doing. You'd feel really good about it. We want to set an example for the world that we don't have to give in to the United States. We don't have to be a puppet any longer." It was a very enlightening moment. And then, more time spent with him where he really helped me understand how GDP was not a measure of prosperity for a country. It was only a measure of how well the wealthy are doing. Yeah, and there was an enlightening moment when I quit being an economic hitman and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think we do need to have more conversations, Ryan. I've enjoyed this, and I'm headed for the Amazon for about 3 weeks, in about a week, a little over a week. But it'd be good to maybe talk about the time the new book is coming out, about China. I'd love to get into that in more detail, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. I taught at an MBA program in China, in Shanghai, and it was a very enlightening experience for me, a very interesting experience. And
absolutely, yeah. John, that'd be unreal.
I love what you're doing. You're doing great work, and the fact that you're exposing all of this is wonderful. And thank you for the plug for the book. I'm so grateful that it had such an impact on you. I like to hear things like that. It's nice always to hear it.
Thank you so much, John. Mr. Perkins, a thrill. Sorry for rushing through it. But yes, hopefully we get more chances to speak publicly.
And I'd like to close by saying I think all your listeners can understand that we're all living in the most blessed times possible. We are at a cusp. We're at a turning point in what it means to be human. We may not make the turn. I'm not sure we're going to, but we have the opportunity truly to move from what I describe in the books as a death economy to a life economy. We are at this very, very critical time in human history, and we should all be grateful to be part of this. We can participate in a consciousness revolution that can really turn things around, and that's exciting. It's very exciting.
Amazing. Mr. Perkins, see you, mate.